Welcome back to the channel. I'm Kevin, and today I'm making these sister blades from Hades 2. This is the combination of a sword and a sickle, which we see in the release trailer and the original artwork on Steam. This project turned out really nicely, which is why I actually 3D printed a mount so I could put the sword up on my wall. That was a pleasant surprise because it was a disaster at pretty much every step. It all started about a year ago. This game was supposed to go into early access in 2023, and I wanted to be the first person to make these. The release was delayed, and I forgot about this project for several months. That came back to bite me pretty quickly, but we'll get there. Like usual, I started by finding a reference image. Now, any of you who have watched my other videos should know that I love to complain about anime, manga, and webtoons being inconsistent about weapon designs and dimensions. Now in this case, I only had the reveal trailer and the promotional art posted on Steam, so there can't be too much of a conflict there, right? It's definitely the same weapon in the release trailer and in the promotional artwork, but it looks very different. I decided to go with the promotional artwork because I hope it's going to be truer to what we see in the actual game. I quickly sketched over top of these and added my notes. Tracing the sword took way longer than the sickle. My first designs were totally off the mark. Eventually, I did get something that was mostly okay, but I had to make some adjustments while modeling. Then I went ahead and nearly finished modeling this, or at least that's how I remember it. The new early access date snuck up on me, and I came back to quickly polish off this project, only to find out that what little I had done was totally unusable. I decided to just throw it all out and start fresh. The issue I had last year, which slowed me down again on this attempt, was getting the sword's guard correct. Here you can see me trying it with a plane, which didn't work at all. Eventually I managed this by extruding circles, but it took me dozens of attempts. I didn't even start on the sickle last time, which really makes me wonder again why I thought this was almost done. Thankfully, it went pretty quickly. I used a series of circles to get the geometry for the blade, which worked quite well. I could have done this by tracing the shape with a plane, which I talked through in my Tai-Chic dagger video last month. That's the approach I normally use for bladed weapons, but I think it would have been really hard to get the curves right in this case. The worm on the bottom was one of the trickier parts. I'm not sure if this is what it's supposed to be, but I think it's a really cool interpretation of the art and fits with the style. So last month, I gave a bit of a teaser for how I was going to be joining my prints together from now on. Up to this point, I've generally added a 2mm hole between the pieces, and then broke 15 gauge finishing nail into short lengths, maybe half an inch, and putting them between pieces to keep them aligned during gluing. I originally got this idea from looking at how dowels were used in some woodworking projects, and while it's been better than nothing, I've known for a long time that it isn't really a good solution. On this project, I experimented with using small biscuits to join the pieces together, which is yet another idea I'm borrowing from woodworking. There's definitely room for improvements, and I've already started tinkering with this on future projects, but I do think it was a step in the right direction. I attached the pieces together with 2-part epoxy. I used some large woodworking clamps to help hold this together while it dried, which worked surprisingly well. I did multiple rounds of sanding, wood filler, and primer to get this as smooth as I reasonably could. It's not perfect, and you can still see some rough areas if you get up close or let the light hit it at just the right angle, but a couple of hours of finishing is generally good enough for a cosplay prop or display piece you're going to put on the wall. During this stage, I realized I hadn't dragged some of the details all the way into the blade, and there were some awkward gaps. I fixed these with wood filler, but I've modified the actual files I'll be posting so any of you making this at home won't have to worry about this. I started painting by applying a silver base coat to the blades, and then mixed silver with a bit of turquoise to get the bluish silver color we see in the reference image. I'm not sponsored or anything, but I've had good experiences with folk art metallic paints for years now, and I use them on pretty much every project. This time I had an odd issue, that my large tube of silver was very dilute, and the little bit of turquoise I mixed with it quickly overwhelmed the silver color, so these blades were a bright blue for a couple of the early coats. Later on, I started using one of my smaller tubes of silver, and it worked as expected,
The other month, I had some issues with my Uchine from Tsukimichi being a little streaky, and I assumed it was just a mistake on my part, but now I'm wondering if it was actually the paint. I'm going to assume this is just a fluke, but let me know in the comments if you've had any similar issues. For the handle, I started by using a mix of normal orange and brown acrylic paint. It didn't look quite right, but it was fine for a base coat. On the second coat, I switched it up and mixed some metallic copper with orange. The result was slightly better, but still not what I wanted.
I was examining the sickle reference image, trying to figure out exactly what colors to mix for the handle, when I noticed something pretty significant was missing.
It turns out I had toggled this part off when I was exporting these files. I fixed that in the files I uploaded, but this wasn't in the version I printed.
This really stings. I put a lot of time and effort into these projects, but I also have a full-time job and other responsibilities. I can carve out a few hours on the weekend to model new projects and make videos like this, but most of the finishing and painting you see me doing is done in 15-minute increments over the course of weeks or months. Silly, embarrassing mistakes like this happen a lot more than I'd like.
Within a couple of hours, I had printed some pieces to fit over the handle. I glued these on and they fit beautifully. I still wish I'd done this correctly from the start, but this was a pretty neat solution made possible by my printer's extra fine 0.08mm setting. Wood filler helped cover the slight gap, although sanding it off did get dust onto some areas I'd already painted. I decided to add another coat of bluish silver to everything while painting this little piece. I try to use premixed colors when I can, so I can easily touch things up in situations like this, but I don't have this exact shade. I don't trust myself to mix the same exact color twice, so I opted to do another coat on everything just to be safe. While finishing this last round of silver, there was an accident. I hang props up to dry, and the thread I was using snapped, dropping the sword point first onto the ground. I've been doing this for years, and this was the first time this has happened. I quickly glued it back on, but it was a little deformed from the fall, so I snipped off a little bit of the plastic to get a better point. Part of the guard also chipped, but I didn't fix it. It's less noticeable, and I also couldn't find the missing piece.
After that long and very unnecessary detour, I was finally able to get back to painting the handles.
The third time was the charm, and I got the right color mix by using metallic ruby red with some regular orange acrylic paint. The last piece I had to do on the sickle was to paint the piece joining the blade and the handle turquoise, but I decided to do a little bit extra. After a lot of thought, I painted the worm's eye sockets a darker color. This was a bit of a risk because I thought it might come out looking amateurish, but I really liked this detail and wanted it to pop.
To finish off my sword, I had to add gems to the pommel and the blade. I've actually done 2 sets of files for this. The first has the gems modeled as part of the sword, so if you printed that set, just paint them the appropriate shade of green. The other option, which is what I've gone with here, doesn't include the gems, so you get to add your own.
For this project, I really wanted to experiment with using these glass cabochons to get a transparent look for the gems. I bought these on Amazon, I'll put the link in the video description, and actually designed the rest of the model around these. I tried mixing some green food coloring and gloss Mod Podge to tint these. I also did a version with some green paint as a fallback. I liked the look of the food coloring ones, but they were too streaky and the color wasn't intense enough. I redid these more carefully and added more food coloring, to the point it was 1 part food coloring to 2 parts Mod Podge. The result wasn't perfect, but it was good enough, so I glued these on.
I sprayed these both with a clear matte sealer and they were done. I'm really happy with the results. I think the sickle looks great, but the sword is my favorite. The cabochons just came out so much better than I was expecting, and I'm definitely going to be incorporating these into some of my upcoming projects. That wraps this one up, so if you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I'll post all the files on Thingiverse, so if you want to make your own, just check the link in the video description down below. Until next time.